Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mark Moss Show, where we talk about, of course, each and every week, the decentralized revolution, how the world is literally breaking apart right before our very eyes. Now, I like to bring to you some education, which, of course, I talked big about what's going on with the dollar this week, and bring to you some, interesting guests. And I also want to bring to you the latest breaking news and kind of explain that. Now, look, I get it. You can read the news yourself, but I think a lot of times people are left with okay, so what does that mean? What do I do with it? Kind of a thing. And so I want to bring to you some interesting perspectives on the news. Make sure you're up to date with what's going on. And some of the biggest news that I've been talking about lately has been what's kind of been dubbed as this Operation Choke Point 2.0. And I've talked about this quite a bit. Where the original choke point was basically the Obama administration weaponizing the financial system against what were considered legal businesses in the United States, but unfavorable. So these were things like check cashing, gun stores, adult-related businesses, things like that. Legally protected, but yet, maybe somewhat unfavorable. And they weaponized the financial system against them. They also weaponized the IRS, which, of course, was all admitted. IRS Chief Lois Lerner had to step down in disgrace for weaponizing it against conservatives, specifically against Tea Parties, not denying them their protected status of a nonprofit, as well as targeting them for audits and things like that. Now, interesting enough, we've seen back to kind of this choke point 2.0, sort of the same thing happening. And on a side note, we saw the Twitter files, which I've talked about extensively here, how the U.S. government, including the Biden administration and the FBI, basically using its force to pressure Twitter to suppress information, to promote information as well as censor information. So we've seen that. And then, we've seen that because Elon Musk, after buying Twitter, released all of that information in what is now infamously known as the Twitter files. And he released this information to some different reporters, Matt Taibbi being one of them. And, of course, the federal government doesn't like being exposed and has since requested that all those people appear before a committee. Now, while Matt Taibbi was being questioned, potentially even threatened by the U.S. government for how dare you release this information, you better disclose who you got this information from, all these things. Interestingly enough, the IRS just happened to go to his house at the same time. Interesting. But Operation Choke Point continues to be waged against the U.S., the average citizen. Now, a bunch of headlines that are really demonstrating this. And so a couple of the ones that I saw this week that I thought were pretty interesting. Now, you can tell a lot about a nation by how they prosecute crimes. Do they prosecute crimes against their citizens more harsh or against themselves? Think about that. There's a new bill called the Restrict Act that they're trying to put through, which is basically taking away your ability to use networks they can't control. And it's punishable by 20 years in prison, losing all of your property, $1 million fine, and no due process of law. Now, that seems pretty harsh. You don't even get that for second-degree murder. So if I murder somebody, that doesn't even happen to me. But if I use a network that the government doesn't like, why? Well, because how do they prosecute crimes against themselves? Look at Julian Assange. He's facing 150 years or whatever it is in prison because he showed how the United States government, was killing civilians over in the Middle East. He exposed something they didn't like, and normal people don't get that. No, that's part of what this is going on. Now, we saw this week the U.S. Treasury is warning that DeFi, so in the cryptocurrency space, we have decentralized finance. Now, they warn us that DeFi is being used by North Korea to launder dirty money. And they recommend that the U.S. better look at how it can enhance its existing anti-money laundering regime. Now, think about that for a minute. Anti-money laundering. It sounds so scary. They need to protect us. They say that decentralized finance, DeFi, services aren't compliant with anti-money laundering and terrorist financing rules. And because of that, it poses a massive risk to the current illicit finances that are happening in the crypto sector. Pretty interesting. Now, they recommend an assessment of possible enhancements. How can we step this up? How can we make it even more strict to the U.S. anti-money laundering requirements that are already there? And of course, this is for your safety, of course, right? Everything's always for your safety because they need to protect us from these scammers. At the same time, we saw the U.S. Treasury came out and said that these decentralized crypto markets actually threaten national security. How dare you have the ability to transact without the government's intervening in that? And if you do that, it threatens national security. You're at risk. You don't have a right to put the whole world at risk. How dare you? Sort of like we saw during the pandemic, right? Now, as they're doing this, what happens? So, sort of like when the U.S. uses its heavy-handed arm against other nations in financial sanctions, well, it pushes them out of the financial system and they go set up their own financial system. So what happens when the U.S. is now imposing laws against cryptocurrencies, decentralized finance, and things like that? Well, it starts to push them out of the system as well. Good old Elizabeth Warren, as Trump called her, Pocahontas, I'm not going to get into that story. It's an interesting story if you want to go look it up. It's her lying, of course, is why she got that name. But she's running on a campaign to literally shut down cryptocurrencies. It's an anti-crypto campaign that she's running on. Think about this. She's in her 70s. She makes a salary of about $230,000 a year. And she's worth now like $65 million. She'd have to work, I don't know the math, 1,000 years and never spend a single penny of her income to get that kind of a net worth. Someone who's grossly benefited from the fiat monetary system and grossly benefited from insider deals inside the government, back channel deals. So, of course, she's going to try to shut down any system that would threaten that, which is cryptocurrencies. But I haven't actually remembered any time any lawmaker, any political candidate has ever run on a platform to literally take things away from Americans. Most times they're running on campaigns to give more. Hey, we're going to give you financial aid. We're going to forgive your debt. We're going to give you more welfare. Most of the times they're offering to give you more. When has a candidate ever ran on a platform to take away or restrict freedoms? As a matter of fact, I can't think of any. So I asked ChatGPT. And I asked ChatGPT this question like, hey, when was a president that actually ran on a campaign like this? And the answer it gave me back was, it's never happened. And we don't think that it would ever work in the United States because in a land of freedom, any politician that was running on a campaign to take away freedoms wouldn't have a chance of winning, which I thought was pretty interesting. But I just think about the craziness of having, and I'm sorry if you fit into this camp, but a 70-plus-year-old person making laws against technology that we don't even know how big of a change this is going to make to the world at this point. And they're literally taking a technology that they don't understand. Look, I think any person over 70 is going to admit to you they don't understand technology that well. And they're trying to use their power, their weight, and their misguided age to put laws restricting the flow of this technology that could have an impact on my kids and my grandkids and future generations to come. But also what it does is continue to destabilize the United States as it continues to push all of this out of the market. We saw, stable coins, I talk about this a lot, they have a big need in the market right now in this kind of introductory phase that we're in. And we've seen the U.S.'s favorite stablecoin, USDC, Circle, seeing $10 billion worth of outflows, while Tether's market cap has gone up by $10 billion. And so we can see that people are starting to go, hey, look, the government's hostile towards me. The U.S. government is hostile towards me. I want to get my money out. That's not a good thing. We talked about, good old Elizabeth Warren. She's trying to run on an anti-crypto campaign. The insanity of running on a campaign to literally take away Americans' freedoms doesn't seem like it's going to work out too well. But they're really coming at cryptocurrencies from every angle. But they want to seal off the exits. They don't want you to be able to get your money out, which is why they're warning you. The U.S. Treasury says that DeFi is used by North Koreans. And the Treasury Secretary says that it's threatening national security. But as they're doing this, we're seeing money moving out of U.S. markets and into international markets. As a matter of fact, we also saw massive amounts of money leaving what we call centralized exchanges, where people use like Coinbase and Kraken to exchange cryptocurrencies, and moving on to decentralized exchanges where people don't have any control over that. But to kind of understand what's going on, I think it's important to understand the 4 functions of money. So I talk about all the time, remember, we don't want money. We want the things that money buys us. Money is a medium of exchange, and really there's 4 functions of money. So 1, it's a store of value. So I use money to store my energy, store my value, so I could use it at a later time. So I don't have to spend that money today. I can use it tomorrow to buy the things that I want tomorrow. So it stores my value. Number 2, it's a medium of exchange. Once I've stored my value in it, and then I can go buy those things tomorrow, I have to be able to exchange it. So I want medium exchange. Third, money is a unit of account. So we think of everything as priced in dollars. Dollars is how we account for everything. How much is that house? It's $1 million. How much is that car? It's $100,000. How much is that hamburger? It's $10 or whatever it is. So that dollar is now our unit of account. And ultimately, though, the fourth function of money is a system of control. And this is what the U.S. government wants. I did a video on my main YouTube channel, and I think I talked about it on the radio as well, talking about how the U.S. Treasury is really like the all-seeing eye of Sauron. And what the U.S. Treasury wants is it wants to be able to see, and not just see and surveil, but actually control and intervene in every single financial transaction. They want to be like a toll booth where everything has to flow through, and at any given time, they can put a crimp on it. And that's why they want to limit cryptocurrencies where they don't have control or surveillance of it. That's why they want to limit gold. That's why they want to limit cash, because they want to be able to see everything, and not even just see and surveil, but able to control. The problem is that money can't really be a good medium of exchange if you're not able to exchange that money freely with whoever you want. I talk about this all the time. I say that without the freedom to transact, there is no freedoms. So while our government guarantees us the freedom of assembly or the freedom of speech or all these other freedoms that we're guaranteed, if I am not able to transact, if I can't pay to put gas in my truck, I can't go to the assembly. Now we see this happening in China with their passport, their health passport system and their social credit score system. Several protests over the last year in China have erupted, and as people are trying to go to those protests by train, bus tickets, etc., on their app, it just turns their health passport red, and then they're not allowed to buy a train ticket or bus ticket anymore. And since they can't buy a bus ticket to the protest, they can't go peacefully assembly, which in the United States we're guaranteed. And so without the freedom to transact, there is no freedom. And so money can't be a medium of exchange if we can't use it freely. And what happens is, as this all-seeing eye of Sauron continues to grow, and as these new avenues continue to sprout out, Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, cash, etc., they have to continue to crimp down on that. Now, in that video, I talked about how as the corruption of the government grows, the people see this and the people lash out against that. And so as the corruption grows, as the people want to now push back on that corruption even more, the government has to now clamp down even more. And so that corruption continues to spread and grow, which is how Elizabeth Warren is worth like $63 million on a public servant salary. Corruption. If you don't think she's corrupt, I'd love to hear what you think, how she got that rich on a public servant salary, because I'd sure like to know. Hit me up on social media @OneMark and let me know how you think Elizabeth Warren got so rich. But the corruption grows. So what happens is something new finally emerges. And that something new that emerges is starting first not as a store of value, but first as a medium of exchange. After it becomes a medium of exchange, then it becomes a store of value. Now, after it evolves from a medium of exchange first to a secondary now store of value, it could potentially, could evolve into becoming a unit of account. But it will never give the government the system of control they want. See, this new form of money was designed to be neutral. Nobody can control it. It's permissionless. Nobody has to have permission to join or use it. It's borderless. It doesn't matter which country or where in the world you're at. And most importantly, it's censorship resistant. Censorship resistant, remember, because in order to be a medium of exchange, it has to be able to be exchanged freely in order to have freedom. You need that censorship resistant. You can't be censored for transacting. Now, the Pocahontas, the Elizabeth Warrens of the world, the U.S. Treasury, they're going to tell you that this is a danger for the safety. This is a threat to national security. And so we have to somehow regulate this. So we're going to do everything we can to shut this down. But of course, what do they have control over? When it comes to this new form of money like Bitcoin, they don't have the ability to shut the network down. They don't have the ability to censor the transactions or control the transactions. So what they try and do is they try to control anything they can have, anything they do have access to. What do they have access to? Well, that brings us back to Operation Choke Point 2.0. What they have access to is they have access to laws. And so they can choke off what they have control over, which is exchanges. So they can use the long arm of the law, the Securities Exchange Commission, and go after all these exchanges. Like Coinbase got this notice, this Wells notice, and Kraken and Gemini and all the Binance now is under threat of being shut down by the DOJ. And so they can use the long arm of the law to go after the exchanges. Okay, so they're doing that. Then they can go after the bank accounts. So now they can go to your bank account and say, you can't, now you no longer can you transfer money from your bank account to an exchange anymore. So we're seeing that left and right. Banks are denying wire transfers to companies to buy Bitcoin, so they can shut that down. They can control fiat currencies. Basically, they can shut down all the on and off ramps. They can prevent you from moving money in to Bitcoin or crypto and moving money back out by shutting down the exchanges, shutting down your bank accounts, and so forth. But what they can't do is shut down the network itself. So what do all these people all around the world and all these millennials today who have no money, what do? They use their creative potential. So I don't have any money in the bank anyway. But what I can do is I can use my ideas, I can use my creativity, I can use my labor, and I can exchange those things freely. They're mine, labor, creativity. I can exchange those freely for Bitcoin. And then I'll just stay in Bitcoin. And all my transaction will be done in Bitcoin. I'll earn in Bitcoin. I'll spend in Bitcoin. And now you can shut down the exits, and who cares? Because we exited the city. We're starting to see the effects of the policies that are being done to change the world. Like literally, seeing the rise of American exceptionalism and the rise of the sparkling cities that showed the wealth and creativity of the United States to the rest of the world, we're now seeing the exact opposite. And now the cities that were as I said, shining examples to the rest of the world of American exceptionalism have now turned into be examples of policies gone bad. Now, the thing that just drives me crazy is that typically what you do is you look back at previous history and see what worked and what didn't work, and then you're supposed to do more of what worked and do less of what didn't work. But it seems like the people making the laws and regulations are doing the exact opposite. Now, I'm typically one that tends to try to lean more towards stupidity than incompetence over evil. Maybe it's just me because I'd like to believe the best in people, but unfortunately that's just not the way it seems to work. We see that these big cities have been taken over by extremist district attorneys. One of their big plans is to not prosecute crimes. And the big problem with that is that no one is supposed to be above the law. You hear the Democrats talking about this with the prosecution of Donald Trump, which I don't really want to get into too much. But that is accurate. Nobody should be above the law. The law is supposed to apply to everybody equally. And the problem is that the law is applied arbitrarily. And so we have these cities that have become soft on crime. They want to defund the police and all these things. And we're now seeing the effects of those things. As a matter of fact, one of the best cities in the world, one of the most expensive cities in the entire world, San Francisco, has turned into, as Elon Musk labeled it this week, the city of the walking dead. Elon Musk said that the Silicon Valley looks at like a doom loop. So the situation in downtown San Francisco is, quote, extremely concerning. He said, quote, violent crime in San Francisco is horrific, and even if attackers are caught, they're often released immediately, end quote. And, of course, he tagged the district attorney there, Brooke Jenkins, in his tweet. Now, Brooke Jenkins took over, I believe it was Gascon that was there before him, which Gascon went to L.A. and is now doing the same thing in L.A. that happened to San Francisco. But we can see what these policies of being weak on crime have done. And it's destroyed one of the most beautiful cities. We saw, in contrast to this, down in El Salvador, President Bukele has been very, very tough on crime. And he's been taking a lot of flack for people all around the world because he's put a lot of people behind bars. And maybe a lot of these people haven't had their due process. But what he's done is he's taken away crime, and he's created an environment that people love to live in. Look, it doesn't matter if you're left or right, Republican, Democrat. It doesn't matter if you're a natural-born citizen or an immigrant. Most of the people that have come to the United States have come for opportunity, but they've also come because the countries they've come from are war-torn or violent. So you're either a Syrian refugee, or you've come from like Venezuela where the violence is so bad. Nobody wants to live in violence. Nobody wants to live in crime, and that's exactly what's happening. And it really boiled over this week where we saw tech executive Bob Lee. He's the founder of Cash App, one of the most popular, one of the fastest growing digital payment apps in the world. Bob Lee, the founder of Cash App, was found dead after an apparent stabbing in San Francisco. And they indicate no arrests have been made, and they're investigating, but they're probably not going to find anything. But San Francisco has been grappling with all of this type of crime, a massive uptick in crime as it's trying to bounce back from the pandemic. But you don't have to look any further than at the policies. Turns out, if you don't prosecute crimes, people tend to do more of them. And as a matter of fact, we can see in San Francisco just this year, we see an uptick of 20% increase in crime compared to the exact same time period in the previous year. In total, there were 56 homicides in San Francisco in 2022, which is the exact same amount of homicides the city saw in 2021, and we're already over that number. We're on pace to beat that number. And it's not just San Francisco. As a matter of fact, in New York, we're seeing the same thing. As a matter of fact, a study shows that 72% of New York City violent crime suspects are freed without bail, and they go on to commit even more crime. 47% of New York City suspects previously charged with felonies were rearrested for crimes, including more than 31% of whom were rearrested for felonies. So, again, turns out if you don't punish crime, people tend to do more of it. More than 17% of people rearrested for violent crimes, and almost 4% rearrested for firearm charges. In all three categories, felonies, violent crimes, and firearm charges, felony suspects had a higher rate of rearrest after they were released without bail than those who were arrested and required to post bail before the new law went into effect. Surprise, surprise! Turns out when you actually punish it, you get less of it. It's one of the reasons why I saw President Bukele. He was on Tucker Carlson a few months ago. And he said, hey, I'm from El Salvador. We're a third world country. We've been a very violent third world country. And some of these big cities in the United States, I don't even want to go to. And this is all, unfortunately, leading into the decline of, the United States, and ultimately the decline of the global world order, which of course we talk about each and every week here, the decentralized revolution that we're going into. It turns out when you have these type of policies, things tend to break down. It turns out when you incentivize people to do things like this, you get more of it. I also saw a story this week. It was talking about if you guys remember, there was the protests that were happening in, was it Waukesha, I believe, where Kyle Rittenhouse was being charged for defending the property. And some extreme person decided to drive their car through the crowd and injured like 60 people or something like that. Killed, I don't know, a dozen people, something like that. Don't quote me on the number. And they did that after being released with no bail on a previous violent crime. Now, the DA said, look, we knew when we put these laws into place, we knew that there would be people released that would go on to do more crimes. But how is that okay? It's not okay. But this is where we're at in the late stage of society. We see the breakdown in society. And I don't want to talk a whole lot about the Donald Trump situation, but that's a similar situation where we have the rule of law being used arbitrarily as opposed to unilaterally, right? You see, laws are supposed to be the same for everybody, and they're supposed to be set in stone. So I can set my life and plan my life based on those, and so can you. So, for example, if we were both playing basketball, the rules of basketball apply to us both equally. You may be taller or faster, I may be shorter or whatever, but it doesn't matter. I may have to play the game a little bit different, but the rules still apply to us, and the rules don't change. And I believe that's one of the reasons why we look at basketball, people love sports, and even when you're like LeBron James and the best basketball player and you're paid the most, nobody hates him for that because everybody sees the rules are fair. But in our society today, people look at the rich people with contempt. People look at these rich people with contempt because they see the rules as being unfair, because they are. You see, when you fertilize and water a lawn, the grass grows unevenly. The only way to get the grass to all be even is to cut it all down. And so that is exactly kind of where we're at right now. Rather than allowing people to prosper based off of uniform laws, it's being arbitrarily applied. One thing that I've been keeping my eye on, we talked about in an earlier segment, went deep into the death of the dollar and what that means. And we talked about the breakup of OPEC, or not the breakup, but I should say the attack of OPEC against the United States and what the Fed is doing, and how that will lead to more inflation. We talked about the rise of the BRICS nations and how they're starting to trade outside the U.S. dollar and what that means. And there's a couple things in there that I think are pretty important to understand, but more specifically when we look at it in regards to in the United States and what's happening with our economy and our markets. You know, one of the biggest bellwethers to the economy and what we would expect for inflation would be gold. Gold's been around for over 5,000 years, and it's made a lot of waves this week as it reached its all-time high, passing the $2,000 level, which has been pretty amazing to watch. The thing that's important to understand with gold reaching that level is that gold goes up in times of high inflation, which we've been having, but ultimately it's not just inflation, it's real rates. And so when the Fed has been raising rates, and the dollar has become stronger, we're seeing gold go up at the same time. Now, that is very uncommon. We don't typically see that happening, and I think it's important to understand why. A lot of that is coming because what we're seeing is the market is having a loss of confidence in the U.S. dollar. So even though the dollar is trading strong, we're seeing what's happening all over the world. Now, it's important to understand as well that, it's important to understand that while we live in a U.S.-centric worldview, meaning that if we're living in the United States, but even if you're not, the dollar is the reserve currency of the world, and the financial markets do make up the majority of the financial markets in the world. But gold is a global asset. Gold is in demand all over the world. Gold is being added by central banks all over the world. And so just because things in the U.S. might be under control, might not be under control, we're seeing demand happening globally. We're seeing currencies drop left and right, whether that be in Lebanon or Turkey or Venezuela, Argentina. And as these currencies drop, people have to go into something else. So what do they go into? Well, if they can go into dollars, a lot of them might try and do that. Otherwise, gold might be a good option. We're seeing Bitcoin being an option there as well. But this is, I believe, a big shift in what we're seeing in the world. But more importantly, not just where the strength of the dollar is, but it's the confidence of the dollar that's a big deal. And I think part of that is also based off of what we're seeing happening in the United States as far as the reports that are coming out in the economy. We saw the JOLTS report come out, which is the job analyst report to see what's going on, and it's not good. As a matter of fact, it shows some hard times ahead. I've talked about ChatGPT before. I've been using it quite a bit. Hopefully you guys have been using it as well. I made a video on my main YouTube channel talking about using ChatGPT for an investment advisor. Go check that out on my main YouTube channel if you're interested. But I've been using it a lot. Yesterday, I was out here using it for all types of things. I was trying to search for it, kind of using it as a teacher. So rather than just combing through 100 websites, it can give you very concise answers. And I saw this report this week, this news article came out where a Goldman Sachs trader basically took the JOLTS report, the jobs report that came out, and he wanted to see if the AI, if ChatGPT could actually replace what Wall Street economists are doing. And he uploaded the JOLTS report and asked it to provide an analysis and an assessment of this report. And the results that ChatGPT came out with were pretty interesting, to say the least. As a matter of fact, ChatGPT said that, quote, "we are all on borrowed time." Which, of course, we already knew that. But it's interesting to see ChatGPT come out with that and tell us that. So why is that? What were some of the points that ChatGPT came out with to determine that we're on borrowed time? Well, one, it said that the data in that report is consistent with a decelerating economy, meaning things are slowing down. Surprise, surprise. Of course, we already knew that, going into like a recession. And so that's exactly what it said. So it showed, one, the decrease in job openings. So what we saw is that the total amount of private job openings went down. Now, what that means is that fewer opportunities for job seekers is typically represents slower growth. So obviously, if things are growing, if more people are shopping at my store, buying my product or service, I have to hire more people, obviously. So if things are slowing down, I'm not hiring anybody. Or if I'm worried about where things are going, I'm not hiring anybody. The second data point that it pulled up was the decrease in hires. So the total amount of private hires has decreased as well by 145,000. And that indicates that companies are cautious about expanding their workforce. So the decrease in hires and the decrease in job openings are sort of the same. If you're uncertain about the future, you don't want to take on new employees. You're trying to keep your costs low, not expand those costs. The third data point that it pulled was the decrease in layoffs and discharges, which is kind of weird. You would think that typically a decrease in layoffs or discharges would be a positive sign for the economy, right? I mean, if you're hanging on to workers, then things must be pretty good. But when you combine it with the decrease in job openings and hires, it could suggest that companies are actually more hesitant to let employees go due to the uncertainty of finding new hires in a slowing economy. So it's pretty interesting to see that. Of course, we've already known that, but that's exactly where things are going. The jobs report isn't good. The future of the economy is looking pretty bad. And like I said, as ChatGPT said, we are living on borrowed time. Now, in addition to that, at a time when the economy is slowing down, which isn't good, that's your income. So there's two sides, right? You have your income and you have your expenses. On the income side, that looks to be slowing down, going down, which of course is what the Fed wants. The Fed is trying to crush demand by raising rates. Their goal is to have unemployment go up. I played you a clip of 2 weeks ago of, I believe, Senator Kennedy and maybe both Elizabeth Warren basically grilling Jerome Powell and said, look, your goal is to increase unemployment, right? Yes. Okay, you want to go from 3.5% to 5%, right? Yes. Okay, that means 2 million people will lose their job. They said, what do you want to say to those 2 million people that are going to lose their job? And Jerome Powell's like, well, it's important to bring prices down. It's like, well, what about those 2 million people that can't afford to pay their bills anymore? So their goal is to make you unemployed or to bring your wages down so you make less money. But as they're doing their best to make you poor so you make less money, prices are going up. As a matter of fact, I saw this headline this week that shows inflation's inventory gluts are here to stay and are plan to hit bottom line in a weaker economy. So it says that only 1/3 of supply chain managers think that warehouse inventories will return back to normal this year. So this is one of the things that I've been saying a lot, right? The Fed is trying to bring inflation down by attacking the demand side of the equation. Remember, prices are an equilibrium of supply and demand. So if there's more demand than there is supply, prices go up. So they're trying to crush the demand. The problem is that the problem with inflation hasn't been so much on the demand side of the equation. It's been on the supply side of the equation. And they haven't done anything to address the supply side. And basically what this report is saying right here is only 1/3 of supply chain managers think that supplies will return back to normal this year. Meaning the Fed is attacking demand, but that's not the problem. The problem is on the supply side. And of course it is. as we continue to lead into this decentralized world, as we continue to have wars and we have disagreements and we end our global cooperation, supply chains will continue to break down. The U.S. will continue to re-onshore manufacturing, and that leads to a very inflationary world, which is why I continue to say inflation has not peaked. I believe that we'll continue to see higher inflation throughout the rest of the decade. Now, it may go down temporarily in the meantime, but over the long term, it will continue going up. A little over one quarter, 27%, say companies are selling excess inventory on the secondary market because high storage prices are hitting the bottom line. So then what they're doing is, because we can't afford to store our inventory, we're going to dump it, which means we're going to take less profit. So now, on top of these companies' costs going up, now they're dumping their inventory and there will be less profit. Now, what's that going to do to their company's stock valuations? It's not going to be good. Now, one of the things that you need to do is you need to manage a way to protect your purchasing power. You need to make sure that your money continues to buy you more goods and services in the future and not less. And so investing is absolutely crucial. And you want to invest into what I like to consider real assets, things like businesses, things like real estate. And that's why I love this new company I'm working with called raddiversified.com. That's R-A-D, raddiversified.com. And basically, they buy real assets. They buy real estate all over the country. And then they allow you to participate in that with investments as little as $1,000. Now, this is a big deal because typically these things are only available to accredited investors. And they found a way, CEO Dutch Mendenhall has found a way to democratize this and allow you to tap into their lucrative portfolio of investments for only $1,000. Now, you can check them out, raddiversified.com. That's R-A-D, diversified.com. And like I said, you can get your money working for you, growing your purchasing power for as little as $1,000. Now, all investments involve risk, so consult a financial advisor. Learn more at raddiversified.com. That's what I got. You're listening to The Mark Moss Show. Thanks so much for listening this week, and that's what I got. See you next time.